Ms. Angela Kane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you for organizing it, and thank you to all of you for being here, and especially to Madame Ban for honoring me with her presence and listening to this subject. I think it's a very interesting and a very fast developing subject still, and I'm very happy to update you on what has happened. I did a PowerPoint presentation because some of the visuals are really quite compelling, and I thought I would share those with you. Now, to give you a little bit of background, what is this Secretary General's mechanism? There again, which is called the Secretary General's Mechanism for the Investigation of Alleged Use of Chemical, Biological or Toxin Weapons. In true UN fashion, we always have these long titles, but we usually call it the SGM, the Secretary General's Mechanism. And what it is it basically carries out investigations in response to allegations, as you can see, in response to a possible use. It can be triggered by any request from a UN member state, and the mandate goes back to the late 80s. In 87, was endorsed by the Security Council. And what is interesting about it, and you have to know, is that there were previous investigations of the alleged use of chemical weapons in the Iran-Iraq war in the early 80s. And there was no mechanism that existed at the time. And in fact, the one major difference, which I find very interesting, is at the time there was actually an attribution of accountability, like who was the cause of this attack. Now, when the member states decided that they needed a mechanism to actually respond to these threats, which they thought could come more often, they decided to delete the issue of the accountability, which is a very important fact that I wanted to point out, because accountability does come up very regularly in the discussions. And when they had agreed on this document, and I mind you, it's like over 160 pages long, it's quite an extensive document, because it's not only a resolution by the General Assembly and then the General Assembly, or then the Security Council, but it is a whole manual. It's a manual. You know, what do you actually do? What do you do in response? What are the questions that you ask the member states who come up with the allegation? So it's a whole manual that was done. Now, this was only used in 2 cases prior to the current Syrian use last year. Now, here again, we've got the mechanism, guidelines, procedures, the roster of experts in the laboratories, and my office, the Office of Disarmament Affairs, is the lead office for this. And again, here we see, like, how does it happen when there is an allegation? It goes to the Secretary General. Secretary General informs the member states, and he actually can accept this investigation. He receives the approval, has the investigation, and reports back to member states. Now, this is actually the 3 investigations that have been conducted beforehand. There were only 2 prior to Syria last year, and those 2 were in Mozambique and in Azerbaijan, both in the year 1992, so that's like over 20 years ago. So in 20 years, none of the investigations had happened, no allegations had come in, and so we had these 2 allegations that were investigated, but both of these investigations actually were inconclusive. Now, what happened next is that in March last year, on the 20th of March, the Syrian government came to the Secretary General and said there was a very large attack of chemical weapons use. It was in Khan al-Assal near Aleppo, and their forces, their troops were affected, and therefore they asked the Secretary General to investigate this. The Secretary General immediately accepted it. He looked at the request. He accepted the request to investigate this finding, and then said, I will establish a fact-finding mission in order to investigate this. Now, in the days, and even on the day itself that Syria made this allegation, we had a number of other member states coming forward and saying, yes, we are aware of Khan al-Assal near Aleppo, but we're also aware of other previous uses of chemical weapons, and so therefore you have to investigate more than just Khan al-Assal. You have to broaden the investigation. So between March and August, there were actually 16 allegations that were received by the Secretary General. There were more allegations from member states, but they were basically on the same incident. I mean, there were several member states who came forward and said, we know about this incident, please investigate. So actually, there was a very active information exchange with the Secretary General to say, you need to investigate this. So what happens in such a case is I was asked and tasked by the Secretary General to put together a team. Now, I will tell you that it's not that easy to find a team. One of the difficulties, I will state up front, is that we could not use any of the P5 member states. Syria had objected to that, and they said no. They felt it should be non-P5 members. I will tell you that the experts we were looking for obviously have very specific scientific expertise, which not always can be found in many countries. And so first issue was to find a team leader. And I had 3 proposals that I made, and the one proposal that was accepted was the Professor Sellström of Sweden, who turned out to be the team leader, and an excellent team leader he was. And then I had approached OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Now everyone knows what it is. Beforehand, maybe people were not so conversant with the acronym. And also the World Health Organization, because we needed experts in chemical weapons, and we needed experts in epidemiology, meaning medical facts, and doctors. Both organizations were very happy to cooperate with us. They gave us all the assistance that we wanted, and even more importantly, they said, fine, we will make the experts available as quickly as you can. Mind you, everyone has a full docket of tasks, but we were very grateful for the cooperation, the excellent cooperation that we received. So what we did is we put the team together. We assembled an advanced team in Cyprus. We put the logistics in place. You know, there's a huge, just like any other operation, peacekeeping, special political, any humanitarian, any operation, you really have to be very much mindful of the time and the effort that goes in of various parts of the organization to actually prepare these things on the ground. Now, we ran into one major difficulty, and that was that the Syrian government said, we asked you to investigate Khan al-Assal in Aleppo. We did not ask you to investigate additional sites. And that took a little bit of an issue to actually resolve with them. And what I think the objection was at the time, and you have to look at it from a historic perspective also, is when it comes to a case like Iraq, for example. Iraq was under sanctions, and so therefore there was a higher authority, i.e. the UN could go in. Syria said, we are not under sanctions, we're an independent sovereign country, and you cannot just expand at your wish the investigation that we have asked of you. So they wanted us only to look at Khan al-Assal. So what happened is that we negotiated, we came to an agreement that we would investigate Khan al-Assal plus 2 other sites. That was the agreement we had. And then basically I had negotiated, the Secretary General had sent me to Damascus to negotiate on the spot with the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and the Deputy Foreign Minister, and I obtained this agreement. And right away after that, we sent the UN mission to Damascus, these inspectors led by Arke Sellström from OPCW and the WHO to deploy to Damascus. That was on 18 August, and I think you know that 21 August there was a major incident in Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus, to basically shook the world. It was all over. I'm sure that you saw the pictures, you saw YouTube, and so that was when the team was actually in Damascus. And the Secretary General immediately asked me to go back to Damascus to negotiate access for the team to Ghouta. Because again, mind you, we had a legal agreement with the Syrians to say we could investigate these other incidents. Ghouta was not on the list. And so they agreed that we could go into Ghouta and they could deploy. And I must tell you that that was unprecedented because it was the first time, I believe, ever that a team was on the ground within a few days after an alleged chemical weapons attack. Now, how does it work with an investigation? First of all, you've got on-site investigation, meaning you actually go to the site. You can interview survivors, first responders, medical staff, you can review medical records, and you also collect samples, both from people, it's blood, urine, it's biomedical samples, tissue, and also it's environmental samples. For example, when you see on the lower left here, you see like a rocket that had gone into the ground, so they would take samples of that rocket and they would samples of the surrounding soil that basically was there. So that's when the team went in. And what I show you now is something that was typical for us, and that was the team of investigators huddling over a map. And this was like in the garage of the hotel we were in before the team set out. Because what happens is it's very, very difficult to actually get the access. Because what are the parties involved? you have the government, and the government was responsible for our security, but the government was not in control of the whole territory and was not in control of Ghouta, for example. And so therefore they said, well, we have a security, we can hand you over, but at a certain moment, we don't have responsibility for security anymore for you, because then you're in opposition-held territory. The other issue is that I had to negotiate a ceasefire, because of course these were areas that were actively being fought over, and the government was shelling those areas. Now, you could not shell the areas while the team was going in. I mean, this is a security aspect that we were very, very conscious of, because we want to make sure that people are safe when they go in. So what needed to be done is I did get the ceasefire. So the ceasefire was in effect for 5 hours at a time, which was enough to go in, get the samples, interview beforehand. And I'm showing you now a map that shows you a little bit the green line where it starts on the upper left is where our hotel was from where we set out. And then the green line basically shows how we were supposed to route, and the red part on the top upper right is where Zamalka is. That is Ghouta, where the incident occurred. And so you can see it's a very circuitous road. It's actually, you can go much more straight, but you couldn't. And then you see two lines, and basically as a shorter route, there's a little C where it goes up. And that was the route that we were supposed to have taken. But then we learned, both from the government and also from our own security people, to say you really cannot use that short route. You have to go the long route around because it is safer. And you will recall that actually the first time the convoy went in, they were deliberately targeted by a sniper. And I tell you, it was not a random shooting. It was very deliberately targeted at the person sitting next to the driver. And it was very, very scary, because you feel acutely conscious that you're putting people's lives in danger when you send them on such missions. And I have great respect for the people who were on that mission, because they turned around, they came back to the hotel and said, the car is compromised because it's an armored vehicle. We can no longer use the car. Give us another car and we'll go out again. And they went out the same day in the same route. And I must say that this is something that doesn't get mentioned very often, but I think this is a bravery and a dedication to the task that I have very, very high respect for. But I'm just showing this to you because I think it's an interesting illustration of what happened. But when it comes to the negotiation, because of the many groups, opposition groups that are in the area, we had to basically negotiate the access and also the organization of this visit. Because when I say it is the first responders, doctors, it's the victims, it's the sites, you have to organize this beforehand. You can't just go in with an armored vehicle, wave your hands and say, you know, here we are, please come and bring us your evidence. So we had to actually agree with the groups that were in control of that territory to say, please give us the evidence, give us the people, give us the case histories, give us all of the documentation that you have, because everything had to be documented. Everything had to be documented. That's really important. And also, what is very important is what we call the chain of custody. And the chain of custody means that if you're a victim and we're taking a sample, you have to know the name of the victim, you have a picture of the victim, you have a case history, and that chain of custody means that that sample that is being taken never leaves the supervision of the investigation team. That is why there were some instances, parties, whoever said, oh, we have samples of victims that were affected by chemical weapons use. But you have no idea how these samples were obtained. There's no chain of custody, and therefore for the purposes of the integrity of the investigation, those samples could not be accepted or used as evidence by the investigation team. And I think that that is something that's very important to find out. Now, when so we had negotiated this with the opposition, and I think what really took us by surprise, you know, here we are all coming into the modern world, is that while the team was on the ground, you could already see the pictures on YouTube. They were already being put up there. You know, there are the vehicles coming in. You know, they're going in. And I must say that, again, there is a security issue that we had with that, but there was nothing that we could do about it, because we also understood that the opposition wanted to give visibility to this. We were very, very lucky, because we do have excellent teams in Damascus, which we, as a mission for the investigation, very much took advantage of. You have the office of the Joint Special Representative Brahimi, who had been in Damascus, and you have a whole humanitarian team, which is very active in Syria. And we basically asked them to help us, and they did, particularly with their contacts with the opposition, but also with the infrastructure in terms of the vehicles and the assistance and everything on the ground. And from a personal point of view, I will tell you that when you see the people, because they're all working out of 2 hotels in Damascus, and when you see how people are working under what circumstances, how they're perched together in small spaces, and you come back here and you hear someone complaining about possibly needing to overhear someone else's telephone conversation, I get really very annoyed, because we really are very spoiled when you compare that to the conditions in the field under which people are working. And not only are they working under the circumstances, but they're also working with tremendous threats to their own security and instability and without their families. So I really think that we must recognize that when it comes to working conditions. Now, what happened afterwards? I will share with you that after Ghouta, 5 days in 40+ degrees centigrade, I don't even know what that is in Fahrenheit, people wearing hazmat suits and doing these investigations, they were absolutely exhausted. And the other thing that when I look back at it, I think that it was really quite remarkable that you had a group of people, this team that was knit together so tightly, and that went out there every day and came back. And I have rarely seen such emotion from a group of people, men, who come back and who are so affected by what they've seen. I have purposely not put any pictures that they came back with of the victims, because they're quite horrifying to look at. And I do want to spare you that. But on the other hand, it is a fact that these pictures were taken. These were the victims of the chemical weapons attack. But after having done that, the group, the team was exhausted. And I went to the Syrian government and I said, I'm going to have to pull them out. And they said, oh, you can't, because you didn't finish the initial investigation that you came for. And I said, you are absolutely right, but I cannot leave them in the country. They need a break. They're emotionally and physically exhausted, and I'm pulling them out, and I'm sending them back as soon as I can. But on the other hand, they do need a break. They're not soldiers. I can't tell them to just stay and do your duty. They have done their duty, and I'm pulling them out. So what happened then is then we sometimes forget the intricacies of this. Now, we are coming back with a huge number of samples. And the samples, as I mentioned, were both biomedical and environmental samples. You can't just put those on a plane. They're called hazardous material. So you need special planes. And I remember sitting there and dialing the phones to every foreign minister I could possibly think of in Europe to get us a private plane to send it to The Hague first, and then to send it to the various laboratories to have them analyzed. Now, mind you, it was August. August is prime vacation time. So then I pleaded with everyone to say, please, please, cancel vacations, work on weekends, because the pressure, the political pressure to deliver the report and the outcome of this was tremendous. Originally, we had said at least 4 to 5 weeks to have the results. And I think in the end, it was just over 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. And Emily was sitting there. Finland was one of the laboratories which were used as a result. And we had actually, there was a side event during the first committee, and the laboratory head was there. And she said to me, she said, you have no idea what we did. We called people from vacations, and we worked so hard. But on the other hand, they also felt it was very validating for their own work, because it is so immediate. And it is also very prestigious, if you so want, because so much rides on it, so much is dependent on the outcome of this analysis. And there were in total, there were 4 laboratories. And one issue that we did is, you normally have like 1 laboratory and 1 control laboratory, and we basically split it. We split the number of samples because there were so many among more laboratories. So in that case, we would have a validation. The next issue that came up was that when these laboratory samples were analyzed, the Syrian government, and that's the agreement, it's their country, they are entitled to a splitting of the samples. So they had 2 officials travel to The Hague as well, where these samples were split, so they could have like a control mechanism. They could also analyze the samples. And that later on happened. It didn't happen in Syria, but it happened in the Russian Federation, where these samples were later on analyzed. Now, I want you to note, there's the Secretary General. I don't need to introduce him. There's Professor Sellström when he was presenting the Secretary General with the report. And what happened is that the mission did return, as you can see here, within a few days of delivering the report. And then on 13 December, we presented, the Secretary General presented the final report to the member states. I have one picture here that was the half a page in what was then the International Herald Tribune on the day I left Syria. And I came back and I couldn't believe my eyes. And I came back to my husband and I said, you know, look, I said, Bill, this was my hotel with that huge cloud in the background. Now, mind you, I was only there for a short time. I want you to bring this home, that war, shelling, fighting is a constant there. And I want to bring attention also to the fact that, as I said, we have a fairly large team of UN staff working there who are exposed to this every day. So this was just from my case. Now we come to the next step of this whole issue, and that is basically what happened after the issuance of the report. You've got a time frame here. Very, very quickly, it then happened that you had the Russian Federation and the United States agreed to a framework for the elimination of the chemical weapons in Syria. Within a day, Syria deposited to the Secretary General the instrument of accession. And then you had the first submission by Syria to the OPCW of an initial disclosure, because there had been all kinds of speculation. How much do they actually have? You know, is it 500 tons? Is it 1,000 tons? Is it 1,200? And so they disclosed actually what they had. And then at the end of September, the Executive Council of the OPCW, the Executive Council is a 45-member board that is composed of member states that basically receives this on behalf of the OPCW and then discusses it amongst themselves and with the Director General of OPCW. And then they adopted a decision of an accelerated program for achieving the complete elimination. And at the same day, you had the adoption of a Security Council Resolution 2118, which called for the implementation of this. Now, this was really quite breathtaking if you think about the timeline here. And I also must say that when you look at the investigation, the Secretary General's mechanism was, of course, concluded long before the Chemical Weapons Convention came into force. That was only in 1997. So, you know, you had a different issue than dealing with this. Now, what happened was that you had a joint mission that was established, the so-called OPCW UN Joint Mission, and there you see the Secretary General introducing Sigrid Kaag, the joint representative of this mission, and she is leading the mission. She directs jointly to both the Secretary General and to the Director General of the OPCW. And what happened here is that the deadline that was established is very, very tight. You've all heard the magic date of 30 June 2014. And this is basically what the Executive Council of the OPCW also agreed to. And they're having a schedule on the implementation. Now, what happened here is there are various phases. And again, let me show you. The first phase is the initial, what we did for the mission is an operating capacity in Damascus. We have a forward base in Cyprus. And when you look at that, that's been completed quite a while ago. Phase 2, also completed, which lasted through 1 November, which includes the verification. Let me add here, and this is something that, again, many people have not realized, but the OPCW does not actually destroy the chemical weapons. They do not destroy it. The way that it works once a country becomes a member or accedes to the Chemical Weapons Convention is that that country undertakes to destroy the chemical weapons themselves. They have to build the facilities for it. They have to destroy the chemical weapons or the precursor materials or whatever it is that can be used in the manufacture of a chemical weapon. And then they have to destroy them. And then afterwards, they have to destroy the destruction facilities. So that is actually a very interesting process that was not applicable in Syria. Syria had made it very clear, and that was accepted by the two states, Russia and the United States, that had negotiated this agreement, that they were not capable, to actually destroy the chemical weapons themselves. They needed the assistance of the international community for doing that. And that's basically what we've been dealing with all of these last months. But the first phase was really the verification of all of the facilities. And that was done by the OPCW. They sent out the inspectors and they verified what actually did Syria possess, reported back to the Executive Council as well as to the Security Council. There's a monthly reporting schedule that happens. And so that was completed. And then from 1 November to 30 June, you have the monitoring and verification of all remaining destruction activities, which goes through 30 June 2014. And it has been ascertained that there are about 1,000 tons of metric tons of chemical weapons, agents, and precursor. Now, when you come to the other aspects, and that is basically there were intermediate steps that were agreed to. One was 31 December, that was the removal of priority 1 chemicals. Those are the most dangerous chemicals, if I can call it that. And on 5 February of all other chemicals, and then destruction of all Syrian chemical weapons production facilities by 15 March 2014. Now, I come a little bit to the challenges now, because what does it actually involve? And when you look at this, first of all, you see on the right-hand side the pictures. That's the verification that the OPCW inspectors did. What was our role? What was the UN's role? We are basically what I would call the enabler for this mission. And that means we provide all of the logistical underpinning, we provide security, we provide whatever is needed to get the inspectors do their task of verifying and inspecting. So we do all of the rest. It sounds fairly easy, but in a country like Syria, I can assure you it is not. And it's also not because it means the removal of these materials to be destroyed outside the country. Most of the destruction of chemical weapons takes place by actually burning them. Now, that was not a possibility in Syria itself, plus there are no facilities there. And B, the solution that was then found or offered by the United States to do it on a ship, the so-called Cape Ray, fire is not an option either. You know, you need to do it by hydrolysis, meaning it's a water-based solution. And that can be done on the ship, but it also results in a lot more effluents and industrial waste than you would have when you incinerate it. Now, you can see the red line, and the red line is basically from Damascus to the port of Latakia. And so all of this material has to be brought from Damascus to the port of Latakia to be transshipped to several ships. There was basically, Denmark and Norway were the first ships to help in this effort. They have to be receiving this material, and then they had to transload it onto another port facility, and then finally it goes to the ship where it will be destroyed, and that is the so-called Cape Ray. You can see that it is not easy. It's never been attempted in a country that in essence is at war, that there's fighting going on, there's security issues. And one of the difficulties that was faced was that Syria also said, we really cannot do this. It's dangerous to transport chemicals, and particularly chemical weapons. Accidents can happen. And what do we do to protect this? And so they gave the international community a list of things that they needed. I mean, from armored packing material, armored whatever, forklifts. They just didn't have the equipment. And they said, we need to have this equipment in order to get the material packed properly, transported safely to the port so it can be transshipped. And that is basically something where there's still talks going on. A lot of this material was sent already. A lot of the shipment has already been taken care of, but not everything as it should have been. Now, I want to say, where are we now? The full declaration by OPCW, as well as the destruction of all of the mixing and filling of equipment and unfilled munitions, has already happened. The OPCW completed the inspections. There was 2 sites, one site really, where they had not on-site inspection, but by remote, if I can call it that. But on the other hand, they were satisfied that the declaration was correct. But on the other hand, we have still a number of challenges that we need to address. And basically, I want to highlight a couple of the challenges. The first one is the need of bringing technical and medical experts from OPCW, from the World Health Organization. Also, I want you to know from the Environment Program, because of possible environmental difficulties, to bring them into a war zone. And so we really were able, as the United Nations, to provide a unique service because we do have all of these components, and we were able to do this in a very difficult situation. I just want to recall that, for example, several years ago in Libya, the OPCW suspended the verification simply because they were not able to carry it out. We were, because they sort of said, while there was a civil conflict, we're not able to do this. So in this case, they were able to do it because of the United Nations. The other issue that we had is, the challenge is that you need a substantial amount of training and preparation and equipping technical staff to operate in a warlike situation. That was also not easy. It was not easy for the investigation mission either. We had to send them for security training, first of all. These were not people who are used to operating under such dangerous circumstances. And there's certain precautions you must take. So that was something that really was very difficult. And again, to negotiate with the opposition in terms of the routes, etc. Now, the other issue is, in addition to negotiating with various parties, the government as well as with the opposition, is also overcoming mistrust. And I think that the situation in Syria is so politicized that it's very, very difficult to actually maintain an impartial attitude, an impartial stance, and to be trusted by your interlocutors, whether it's opposition, whether it's government, that you are a trusted negotiator and mediator and facilitator. That is really not an easy walk to walk. And I think that basically I am very proud that we have done this so far. I think it's been proven both in the case of the investigation mission. There have not been challenges of a major way, even a small way, of the findings of the investigation mission. And also with regard to the joint operation that is operating now, I think that basically it is accepted as a very impartial operator, and I think that we can all be jointly proud of this. The other difficulty that we're now facing, obviously, is the ambitious deadlines. I understand that Syria has given a new deadline and a way forward in terms of how to implement their obligations. And that has to be endorsed both by the OPCW and by the Security Council. And so that is something that is right now in the works. I do have actually another, I wanted you to see the ship that basically some of the ships, it's always good to sort of see what do they look like. We also have naval patrols and escort ships that were provided. And I also want to mention, and that is the in-country destruction of isopropanol. Don't ask me exactly what it is. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a scientist. But on the other hand, this has already happened, and that was done inside Syria. They did commit to that. And so we do expect that will, in any case, meet the deadline. I have another boat here, and that is this Cape Ray. And then there's the transloading, which will take place at a port in Italy. And the residual toxic chemicals, they will be destroyed in commercial facilities. There are a number of member states have generously offered to destroy these materials. And also there are some commercial facilities that are going to be contracted by OPCW. They had a tender out, and there are 2 companies that have been awarded this. This is like toxic, not toxic, but it's like industrial waste, and that'll be destroyed. Mind you, all of this is being funded by the international community. There are trust funds that have been established both by the UN and by the OPCW, which will pay for this. Again, the challenges, as I mentioned, security situation. We also had in December, there was quite a bit of snow in Syria, which was unusual. Global warming clearly not only affecting us with snowstorms, but also Syria in terms of road transport making very difficult. Continuing implementation by the Syrian authorities, extremely crucial, of the obligations that they have undertaken. Also, opposition groups is critical. And again, active engagement, as I mentioned, with regard to the financial aspects, so we can we can help this. And the Secretary General has been extremely active on this portfolio. As you well know, he's really been on the forefront of all of this, and he wants to do everything that he can possibly do to contribute to the success of this mission. Now, I was asked to include something on the role of women in international peace and security. I'm always very happy to do that. Basically, I wanted to say that we're just writing now the report of the Secretary General on women in international peace and security. We're doing our bit. I think that the role of women in peace and security matters, particularly in political decision-making and peace processes, which has been endorsed by the Security Council in various resolutions. And that is something that we are obviously very keen to pursue, and we always underline when it comes to disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control policies. I will tell you, I attended actually a women's breakfast meeting in Munich at the security conference, where actually I attended with the Secretary General. And it was very interesting because there was a presentation, and the US representative at one point said, well, she said, we're the only country in the world, we have an exclusively female team on disarmament and non-proliferation. And it's true. Normally I go to these meetings and I'm very often in a minority, but I think that is also changing. So that's just on a byline, has nothing to do with chemical weapons, but on the other hand, I'm happy to always kind of underline this. And thank you, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.